Okay. Good afternoon, I think it is now, and welcome to the third of our Metals Meets MEPs webinar online conversations. Great to have so many of you yet again from the metals sector from throughout Europe joining us for this afternoon's discussion. We have an hour together. We hope you'll enjoy the conversation. Today we're talking still, of course, around the Green Deal, which has been at least in part the subject matter for our recent conversations. Today we're going to talk about what's needed to keep industry on track for the 2050 climate goals in light of all that's been happening in the kind of post-COVID-19 recovery. So I'm delighted to welcome our speakers today. So joining us from the European Parliament, we have Michael Bloss, who's a Green German MEP on the Industry Committee, but also a substitute on environment. Of course, as we've been having our discussions, we've noticed very much that the Green Deal is not only an environmental strategy, but also has industry and an economic strategy at its heart. So Michael, welcome today to this discussion. We're also joined, I think, in a first for the debates we've had so far by a Commission representative. So Mark Nicklas is the head of unit of industrial strategy and value chains at the European Commission's Directorate General for Internal Market Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs. Hoping we haven't changed the name again recently. That's what we have down. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you with us to join us today. Mark focuses mainly on industrial modernization. So I think that's how do we industrialize as well as at the same time as addressing climate. It's very important. From our industry speakers today, we have Guillaume de Goys, who's a managing director of Aluminium, clearly one of Europe's largest aluminium companies, and indeed has very much links into ALVANCE Aluminium Dunkirk, which we'll know, and smelters up there also in the former member state I know best as well up there in Scotland. So Guillaume, welcome to you. And finally, we have Marie-Christine von Hahn, who is Vice President of External Affairs at Aurubis. Many of you on the phone on the line will clearly know Aurubis, German-based copper and non-ferrous metals provider generally, and also in going downstream into recycling as well. And I know that in recent days you've seen the finalization of your acquisition of Metallo, very much in the recycling business as well as the production business. So it's great to have you, Marie-Christine, on with us. I will remind the 73 of you who are now watching in that we do have some additional functionality because this is an online discussion. On the right of your screen, you should see a chat function. Feel free, as I know many of you have been doing, to ask your questions and your commentary in chat. I'll be watching, and our panelists will also hopefully be delving into that, and we'll see if we can get some of the conversation with you on the line included. We also have a poll which should now be open, and I see people are already voting. We're asking the question, what is the most important EU action for keeping the metals industry on track towards its EU climate goal, towards the EU climate goals? Is it creating demand for low carbon products? Is it ensuring competitive electricity prices, advancing the circular economy, introducing a carbon border adjustment mechanism, or strengthening competition policy? So please do be voting as we hear the comments of our speakers. So Guillaume, I'm going to turn to you first. Clearly lots been going on in terms of the challenges of dealing with COVID-19. But we have a long-term challenge as well in terms of that 2050 climate neutrality goal that the Commission has set for Europe and that many of us are behind. Be interested just to comment from you, introductory remark about, what do you think is needed to keep us on track to reach 2050 in light of what's been happening in recent months? Guillaume.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm very sorry, my camera is frozen, but I can hear you and can answer to all your questions, of course. So maybe back to 3 months ago when we were in the start of this outbreak. We had really a lot of job to perform to keep our reduction lines online. Because when you stop a hotline, it's months to restart it. So we've struggled to keep it online, and we've succeeded, and we've reduced only by 15% the production, which is not too bad, going the circumstance and a very high level of absenteeism we faced at this time. Now we are back to a quite normal situation where we are restarting progressively all the pots we've stopped at this time, and we will be at 100% of production by the end of June. So that has been a wide crisis for us, but we went through, and now we are looking at the future, of course, and we want to keep our targets. And you may notice that I've been appointed recently as a COO of ALVANCE. So I will cover not only Aluminium Dunkerque, but also the Locaber smelter and the acquisition which is on the way with the Duffel rolling mill. So all of that, plus the downstream businesses in France, we have a common goal. That's to do all what is possible to reach our internal targets, which is to be carbon neutral as fast as possible and as soon as 2030. So that's a path which is not obvious, of course, and given all the outcome of this outbreak, the COVID-19 outbreak, we will need to work all together to first recover from this crisis and then continue in a very forced manner to continue to reach that carbon neutrality, which is where we want to be.
Very good. Thank you, Guillaume, for that introductory statement. Marie-Christine, I mean, you heard there about the ambition that Guillaume and ALVANCE Group have. You clearly, your company in recent days, as I mentioned in the introduction, clearly made an even bigger move into the recycling side of things in terms of the industry. We often hear, I think in Brussels, the link between CO2 reduction and circularity being made ever stronger by the Commission. I'm kind of interested in terms of that, in terms of your operations, what will they need to maintain that kind of progress towards getting that circular loop, that metals loop going, and how that contributes to what you see in terms of the climate challenge. Marie-Christine.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, just now, the last part of your introduction wasn't here. So I'm going to start with what I wanted to say anyway.
Yeah, just say whatever you carry on speaking.
Just to add on what Guillaume just said, Aurubis is like the same. We saw, obviously, as for everybody, every company, every single person has corona shake up at the moment to rethink structures and to see anxiously what the markets develop like. We saw a weakening in the supply markets. We saw a shake up in all our supply chains. But more or less, we have come to good all so far as well. And exactly as you pointed out, James, with the acquisition of Bloss of the panel, looking to the future quite positive. And so do we in a political way, if I may say so, because I think two things, try to move closer to the screen.
Please.
Two things that Corona obviously didn't succeed to change, is that A, the Green Deal remains a necessity for us Europeans to us all Europeans, and B, the European functioning, well-working, successful European metal production remains essential to the success of the Green Deal. So I think this is the situation remains exactly the same before, while, and after Corona. Because if you take the pure numbers, I brought you with me here. It's the global copper production contributes 0.4% to global CO2 emissions, while copper products enable us to save up to 75% of CO2 emissions. Probably most of us on the line and us panelists too know that without copper, we wouldn't have any electrification, we wouldn't have any electric vehicles, batteries, windmills, you name it, and equipment for digitalization. So, but if coming back to your question regarding what do we need to continue or to stay on track as a framework, also before, while, and after Corona, energy prices and CO2 prices remain our greatest challenge. Copper prices set on international commodity exchanges. We cannot, we don't have any influence on the price. We cannot forward additional regulatory costs that only exist in the EU to our customers. So as soon as we have extra or intensive extra burdens here in Europe, this is a great disadvantage in international competition. And this remains a challenge for us. And at times we think it is a threat to further progress of decarbonization, and also a threat to a significant increase in progress in circular economy. We've had many discussion rounds talking about carbon leakage. We think it is already happening. You can see that labor markets in general are growing, constantly growing, while definitely not at the same pace as here. And as soon as you have products with a low, worse CO2 footprint, being dominant, you have a carbon situation.
Mary-Christine, do you just want to bring your comment to a conclusion, and then I'm going to ask you if you can just log on again, because we're having a little bit of problems with your sound quality. So if you could do a refresh, but maybe just a final sentence before you do that.
Sorry, the connection just got disrupted again. What were you asking me?
Yeah, could you just summarize and then refresh your browser so we can hear you, because we're having some sound issues.
Okay. Summary is we need a global surrounding where we are globally on an international level competitive. We will come later certainly to the eligibility discussion. You were asking for concrete measures. This is certainly one. We need to stay eligible. DG Competition at the time is discussing which sectors should remain eligible. This is certainly one. And I think all the rest of it, which I wanted to say.
Okay. Thank you, Mary-Christine. You were cutting out a little bit in that, and I know there's a bit of a sound issue. Could you refresh for me your browser and see if that solves the problem while I move on to the next speaker? Thank you. There you go, folks. Never work with children, animals, or technology. Hopefully you can hear me. Mary-Christine will rejoin us. Mark, can I turn to you? Normally we're worried about the institutional speakers having issues with connections and things, but it seems it's on the industry side. Hopefully, guys, you can hear me. Please do keep commenting if you can't. Mark, would you like to just comment? The Commission, clearly the non-ferrous metal sector, we heard from Guillaume there about cuts in production. I think we heard a little bit from Mary-Christine in between the cutouts about the demand side of things. Clearly, the Commission is very conscious of the fact that we need a recovery plan and that it needs to be a green one. I think I looked at what came out last week, and to be honest, it was very, very complex. I note from Colleen in the commentary the question about ecosystems and how do they fit together. I'm going to ask you the impossible. Could you just give us a viewpoint for the people on the phone about how is this recovery plan really going to help, especially for hard-hit sectors like metals, do you think? Could you give us a few minutes on that, Mark?
Yes, thanks, James. And maybe before coming to the recovery plan, I still take one step back, or let's say 3 months back to the industrial strategy, which was really following up also on the whole Green Deal objective to become the first climate neutral continent in Europe, but with a competitive industry. To have a globally competitive and world leading industry that paves the way to climate neutrality. And I think there, from the industry presentations, we also had the two fundamental enablers or drivers that are necessary to get that way, which is on the one hand, the circular economy, and on the other hand, the transformation to climate neutral production. Both of them are intrinsically linked. On the circular economy, and therefore we've also combined the industrial strategy with a dedicated circular economy action plan. We are already global leaders in circular economy, but definitely we need to do more. And for the decarbonization of the energy-intensive industries, we need to make sure, on the one hand, that there is enough supply of clean and affordable energy for this transformation. We need to avoid carbon leakage, and we need to create lead markets for such low-carbon products. And in that sense, also the ecosystems, I think, have an important role to play, because the ecosystems are all about interdependencies across borders within the single market, but also across sectors. Just to give a few examples, when we talk about the green transformation of the industry, we think about the electric cars, and we think about the wind turbines, and of course we need metals to produce the wind turbines and to produce the green cars. Now, of course, this whole transformation requires massive investment. Technologies, investments in the take-up, deployment of these technologies, and these investments, even in normal times, would be probably a challenge for individual companies. And of course, in the current situation, with companies hard hit by the crisis, struggling with the short-term survival, there would be a risk that such investments are not taken but postponed. And this is really why the recovery package of last week and repairing the damage, simply also companies to remain solvent, but then for the longer term, really to accelerate the green and the digital transition. So on the one hand, the recovery plan really increases the firepower, the financial firepower of the programs, and then it redirects funding to the green recovery. And let me give 3 examples how that then can work in practice, because I agree that it was quite a complex presentation last week. But one crucial EU instrument is the so-called Recovery and Resilience Facility. And that's 560 billion, both grants and loans. And those will be available for the member states, and particularly the member states that have been hard hit by the crisis. And they should be used for investments that are needed for the green and the digital transition. And the member states need to come up with national recovery plans. Then the second one is the changes to Invest EU, or financial instruments, where on the one hand, we have doubled the budget guarantee for sustainability window, which is really financing all these elements for the green transition. And in addition, we have introduced a new strategic investment facility that will invest also in, or in particular, in technologies that are key for the green transition, including critical raw materials, including the decarbonization of energy-intensive industries, including circular economy. And the third element then is on the research side, our Research and Innovation Framework Program. There we have proposed a substantial increase for those parts that are really for industry, climate, and energy. So those are, of course, now only the proposals from the Commission side. We count on the member states and Parliament to allow for a swift agreement, and also to maintain the degree of ambition, so that we can really turn the recovery into an opportunity and accelerate the transformation to the climate neutrality, and not only, let's say, save the survival of our industry.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm glad you also acknowledged that there was a bit of the headline figures were good last week, but there was some complexity there. And also you rightly point out, that's the proposal from the Commission. We've got a little bit of work on the top line stuff from political commitment from the European Council, no less, but also some legislative action that needs to take place on some of those different instruments. Can I just pick you up just for one point of clarity? I'm sure there's a lot of people from different companies around Europe looking at this and saying, I understand what Mark just said about the amount of money that's being put into the system. I understand it's being tied to those Green Deal objectives that we all believe in, but the kind of practicalities of how it gets dispersed, should companies be looking to what comes from the EU level, or is in effect it all going to be dispersed via national and local authorities? If I'm looking for where do I get the money from eventually, should I be knocking at the Burlymon's door, or should I be going to my my ministry back home?
Well, the majority, I think, would not be available at the Belmont store. Right? The financial instruments, the InvestEU, that's mainly the European Investment Bank. And that's really a very important partner for the financing. And of course, a lot will be channeled via the member states.
Okay, thank you. I move on to Michael. Marie-Christine, can you hear us? You're back with us with headphones. Apologies to those who are struggling to hear. We do test these things, and in the test, all work pretty well. In reality, sometimes it doesn't. Hopefully, we're going to be able to listen to Michael, and his connection is good. Lovely EU flag in the background, Michael. Really, I suppose you come at it. We've talked about the co-legislators being involved in what's coming out of the Commission in coming weeks, and a very aggressive timeline from the Commission that I saw on the Commission's website of we're going to get this all done in terms of the instruments by, I think it said early autumn. But I suppose the question for you is, what's your political priorities? What are the things you're looking for when you look at the industrial strategy on the industry committee, but also that recovery plan that's been come out? What are you looking for to make sure that not only do we succeed in the short term to get industry going again and the economy going, but also we hit some of those longer term climate objectives, which we're all behind? Michael, a few words from you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for this interesting debate already. I think it's very interesting if we look into like the first leaks. Of course, the Commission never comments on leaks, but in the first leaks of the recovery plan, we saw that there was much more conditionality and much more targeted spending towards the green transformation. And in the kind of final product, a lot of this went out. So it seems that there is a little bit of a struggle in the Commission itself. How much is the money actually being really targeted towards the green transformation, or how much is just dispersed? And when we look on the resilience facility that you mentioned, Mark, or the InvestEU, we do not see these clear conditionalities that the money has to be spent on the development of our economy towards carbon neutrality. And I think that is very key and very important, because it's a lot of money, and it's really positive that the Commission comes out with such a thing. But if you don't use it in a targeted way, still maybe it cannot contribute to this really huge challenge to decarbonize our industry. So I think this is one of the roles that we have in the Parliament have to take care of, is first ensure that most of that the Parliament has a say in the spending, because that's another issue. And second, that it's actually spent in the right way. We will not have such an opportunity for the transformation in the next years, so we need to use it. And I think in this regard, it's absolutely important that also industry is asking for that, and is voicing that such kind of guidelines are important. I saw the Stiftung 2 Degrees from Germany, with Aurubis being part of it. They asked for exactly such kind of targeted measures, conditionalities 2 days ago, and I think that was very positive, and it's important that we hear such voices. And I think there's absolutely lots of opportunities, especially for your industries, when is what was mentioned, thinking about what we still have to achieve in terms of renewable energies. I mean, we want to have 100% renewable energies, and we want to electrify parts of the automotive sector, the housing sector. So there's a lot of possibilities. Circular economy, also providing the technology, the innovation that will be used in whole of the world, because everyone needs to decarbonize. So let's really take this opportunity, target the money, so that industry can profit from it. And when we look into the industrial strategy, that was, I think, a first step. But I think what is really needed is that we come up with very clear proposals and guidelines now, and not just say we need low or demand for low carbon products. I think that's important. Even only 10% of you think that that's the most important thing. But that's important, but then how do we do it? Is it, quotas, contract for difference? What's the idea of the Commission? And I think it needs to be out very soon, because the investments for the new plants that are coming up, they need to have a guideline in where to invest. And if we as Europe can give this clear guidance that the journey goes into this direction with rules, with investment, with support, then also the industry will go in this direction. And I think it can be a very successful endeavor, but then everyone needs to play their part.
Thank you, Michael, for those introductory comments. I'm just going to pick up on something you said, but before I do that, I just want to check in with Marie-Christine that technology is now with us. Do you want to say hello or comment?
Hello.
Marie-Christine? There you go. I think we can hear you perfectly. Well done. You're
okay,
back with us.
switch to the headphones. I don't particularly like. But,
brilliant,
yeah.
guys. But,
okay,
we're there or thereabouts. Let's just go back to the conversation about conditionality just for a second while we're on the recovery fund. There was something there. I mean, clearly, Michael, you said there the Parliament, is going to want its say on the money, and it's going to want to make sure that it's tied to those kind of Green Deal objectives. I just wanted to give Mark an opportunity to come back on that, Mark, on terms of the conditionality element of the money in the recovery plan. Clearly lots of different instruments. We just talked about probably a lot of it dispersed via member states. How's the Commission going to make sure that this isn't just the usual dividing up a load of money, spreading out on member states and hoping for the best? How are you going to make sure that conditionality in spending when the member states are selecting projects actually happens?
Well, first of all, we have to wait also for the results of the institutional negotiations of these programs before we can clearly say how we will do it. But on this recovery and resilience facility, the member states need to draw up really national plans. And those plans need to be in line with the Commission's recommendations in the European semester context, what is actually needed for the green transition in these countries. So in this sense, there is a kind of conditionality attached.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I kind of, that was a bit I picked up on, Mark. I think there was a reference in the communication, right, to both the European semester, but also to the NECPs, which I note a couple of member states have finally got around to submitting today. And we've got one member state, Michael, which might be close to your heart, who's still struggling with its national energy and climate plan. But let's go to that poll, because the poll is now, I think, closed and we've published. Michael, you made reference to it. So what do we need? What's the most important action? We have, as you say, 10% for creating demand for low carbon products. We've got 90 people on the line, by the way. So that's 9 people, more or less, that voted for that. We've got ensuring competitive electricity prices, 27%, 22% advancing the circular economy. Only 5% went for a carbon border adjustment mechanism, as we now call it. And then 34%, so our highest was actually strengthening EU competition policy to ensure a level playing field. Let's just unpick that a little bit, maybe. Any surprises in there for you, Marie-Christine? Where's your emphasis? What would you say about those poll results from your colleagues around Europe? Marie-Christine.
Okay.
We still got you?
Sorry,
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you too, but unfortunately, every time you pose a question to me, it freezes. But what I got from you was asking whether you were asking me
any surprise in there from your
surprises.
Yeah.
So I would say, well, obviously, as I stated in my initial remarks, those competitive energy prices are. This is what I would have guessed too. Also, pushing circular economy too. I think that well, no surprises at all. To make it very short, no surprises at all.
So let me bring Guillaume in on that energy prices piece. So I'm sure
James, may I just add one thing?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
just regarding the carbon border tax adjustment, I think it is important to say that. We really appreciate all initiatives and all thoughts on how we can ensure competitiveness and how we can can we strengthen ourselves up against international competition? However, we don't regard this concept, which is, to our understanding so far, just a vague concept. There's so many traps and issues not being thought to the end, that it, if at all, can be an add-on to the existing measures and tools that we have. It is not thought of enough. That's what I want to add.
So I noted in a lot of the Commission documents, it's more an assessment of whether we would need a carbon border adjustment, but a plea there, I think, from Marie-Christine, that if we're going to look at it, it might be an addition rather than an or, an and rather than an or. Let's just bring in Guillaume on the issue of the electricity on energy prices, because I think, Guillaume, you mentioned that in your remarks. Eurometaux, really good study with one of the Belgian universities earlier this year about the non-ferrous metals sector and indeed decarbonisation, and made for me a very strong point, which is, almost that the non-ferrous sector is the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. It's already electrified a large part of its production, and actually there's a very good opportunity of decarbonising the sector if as you said, Michael, we turn towards renewables and low CO2 electricity atoms, right? But clearly then there is a bigger issue, which is in terms of the costs being passed through, the indirect costs of things like the ETS system. We're still looking at ETS as probably our primary legal instrument for driving climate, the climate action that we have. We're looking at the Commission saying June 2021 for doing that. I just want to turn to Guillaume and say, Guillaume, we're looking at 2021 and all of the debates around what's going to happen with ETS. I know the prices have gone down with COVID. I'm guessing they rebound with the economy. What do you kind of need from that next review of ETS? What are you looking for as someone with primary aluminium smelting for the EU to get right to ensure that we continue to produce aluminium in Europe to meet all of that demand that we're talking about? Guillaume, can you hear me? And
yes, I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you. And sorry for the frozen image, but that's very important that we benefit in Europe from rather decarbonized energy compared to where the aluminium is produced in China or in Australia, where the indirect contribution of the aluminium is much more higher compared to what the aluminium produced in Europe. So that's very important that we keep this as a competitive advantage. And if we are unable to keep that as a competitive advantage, and we have currently the CO2 indirect compensation, which is doing a good job to protect the aluminium industry and also the energy intensive users, not only aluminium, and replacing that by some other things, it will be very difficult for us. So we, of course, call for a level playing field, and the current ETS and indirect compensation are giving not so bad results so far. We've been able to continue to produce in Europe, so that's important to continue to do so. The second point is the decarbonization. Of course, for the aluminum industry, the indirect emissions are much more higher compared to the direct emissions. That not means that we should do nothing on the direct emissions. We are globally benchmark in terms of direct emissions, but with innovation, for example, we can do better. We can do better. There are ways to capture CO2. There are ways to improve again our industries and our process to reach, or to not to reach, but to go to a carbon neutrality, even for our process. But that means we need a strong support over the long term through innovation funds, through other means, in order to really have breakthrough and to decarbonize our industry.
Mark, thanks again. Mark, we're going to go on to kind of the more demand side, and we talked about ecosystems and value chains, but that innovation theme that Guillaume has just talked upon, I thought that was very good. I'm perhaps a little bit surprised, actually, Guillaume, we can do more on direct emissions. I note the non-ferrous sector again has done an awful lot already in the course of the last 10, 20 years, maybe even in comparison with other sectors. How do you see the role of innovation, first of all, Mark, and how the Commission is supporting that, particularly, I suppose, in the moment on the kind of more production side of the non-ferrous metals piece? How do you see that kind of innovation story and what you're doing as the Commission?
Well, innovation is, of course, crucial for the success of this whole industrial transformation. For the green transition, and in a similar way for the digital transition. And also when we look now at reducing dependencies on materials, for example, like critical raw materials, it also requires innovation to actually find alternatives. So innovation is really the driver of success for this whole industrial transformation. And that's why also, as I said earlier, we propose to increase the budget for research and innovation, particularly where it comes to this green and digital transition. It's not simply innovation for the purpose to innovate, but innovation really with a purpose to contribute to the green transition. And we know that our companies are leading on that. We have the technological leadership for most of the green technologies. We have the patents, we have the companies, we have the knowledge. And we need
Oh dear. Mark, I've lost you. Did everyone else lose
so
Mark? Oh, he's back.
Oh, good.
You had lost me for a moment.
I lost you for the last,
So
10 seconds. You just want to make your last point? You just want to repeat
My last point was that the impact is really when taking up these innovative technologies across the industry and not only by the front-runner companies.
Okay. Yeah, so it's taking the kind of best techniques, and that's being mentioned, I think, right, by Guy Hahn, who of course is our leader, the leader of Eurometaux, has mentioned that kind of idea that we need to make sure that those best technologies do spread across the industry and are rewarded for such. Michael, I just wanted to turn to you. So we talked a bit about innovation. I think Guillaume and I mentioned, and Christine, the idea that the European non-ferrous metal sector is kind of leading the way in many ways globally as well, but yet operates on this global stage. I'm just interested from your perspective. We've heard about the innovation that's perhaps going on and still more to do. Guillaume says we can do more. I'm interested in how you see the global element of this. We had your colleague, Mr. Butikov, on our last webinar talking about China. So I don't want to make this a trade debate because we just had that. But I'd be interested just in this dynamic of what we're talking about here. How do you see the trade element of that and how we make sure that the advances that European industry is making are, that we benefit from them as a European economy, and we keep industries like the non-ferrous metals industry here rather than exporting it?
I think that's an important question. Also, like coming back to the poll, I see that there is a lot of support for the level playing field, but not a lot of support for the carbon border adjustment, even though kind of the carbon border adjustment is a kind of an instrument that tries to provide a level playing field with the rest of the world. So it's a little bit of the question, from an industrial policy point of view, how do you create innovation? How do you scale up also technologies? We saw in the renewable energy side that the German feed-in tariffs was a way to scale up the production of renewable energy that led to now the renewables being even cheaper than the fossil. So the question is, if you have an innovative technology and do you want to scale it up, maybe like this carbon border adjustment could be a possibility to allow for it to grow and then become competitive after some time. That's kind of the infant industry argument.
So Michael, it sounds like you're quite positive towards the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Did I get that right? You see merit in it, do you?
I see merits in it. Yeah, I see. I think the arguments against it, which I completely understand, is the risks it has on on the global trading system, and also the danger that there could be repercussions from, for instance, from the US side. Still, I think the big question is, how do we scale up innovative industries? How do we protect them? How do we make them kind of competitive in a market situation when kind of carbon intense technologies are cheaper than low carbon technologies? And then you can do through different ways. You can, of course, make contract for differences, and then we pay a lot. Also, like taxpayers pay a lot to scale up. I think it's one of the solutions. The other solution is to have more a protective measure like the carbon border adjustment. Both in the end, I think we have to really understand how the border adjustment really works. I also understand Marie-Christine's comment that this is not yet, there is no yet developed methodology to really understand how that best works. But I mean the how do you say, the challenge of scaling up this innovative technologies is there, and we have to somehow do it. One of the reasons, just to come back, sorry for the on the conditionalities. Yeah, I think that the European semester is there, but the European semester is geared towards macroeconomic stability, not towards innovation and decarbonization. Then the NECPs are there, but the NECPs until now are oriented on a climate goal of minus 40%, and we have to increase it a lot. We Greens ask for minus 65%, and we see that with Guillaume, who his company wants to become climate neutral already by 2030. I think there's a lot of possibilities to get there. So and these are just plans, and I think it's not important to only talk about plans, but also talk about concrete like measures, like the taxonomy for sustainable finance to be applied for all of the spending, so to really gear the investments into the right direction, and then also come up with measures like, for instance, contract for difference to set a good framework.
Thank you, Michael. Marie-Christine, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to comment. Thank you very much, Michael, on those remarks. I find them very interesting. I think that one thing that just popped up to my mind is that I would really plea for a fundamental assumption, and that is, if industry is competitive enough and well equipped and successful, we will, out of our own interest, strive for new and for increasing innovation. It is in our own interest to be innovative, to go for a climate-friendly future, to be better and better. I mean, look at Liberty Aluminium with their goals that they set themselves. It's the best example. Or look at ourselves with our industry heating project in Hamburg. We developed together with the city, even though it is not acknowledged fully by ETS, a system where we take out heating from the sulfuric acid production and heat with that housing areas in Hamburg, a new housing area within the harbor. So, and this was an idea developed over a long period of time, and it really came out of the great aim to be better, to become more climate friendly in those things we're doing. And I think we can really reach great goals with that. But obviously the basis, or this is only possible if we earn enough money, on the other hand, to finance such things. And this is why I wanted to comment on the innovation support. There are so many ways of supporting innovation, and one, if I take this industry heating example, is make ETS, modify ETS in a way that, for instance, such great projects are going to be acknowledged in that system too. And yeah, that's basically what I want to say this time.
So what we're talking about here is how, and Fabio in the chat, thanks Fabio, asked the question, how can we make a more attractive low carbon technology instead of high carbon when the latter are cheaper? So, I mean, one thing that I think, Mark, you referred to was lead markets. We talked, I think Michael also mentioned kind of low carbon, and the demand side is something I just wanted to explore for a minute. and we're talking about low carbon, but we might also, in your case, Marie-Christine and Guillaume, we might also talk about the circularity aspects of that as well as another place where demand, creating a kind of premium for demand from markets, whether they're public authorities, whether it's customers, B2B customers, or indeed consumers at the end of the day. How is that working for people on the industrial side? Maybe I'll come to Guillaume and also let Marie-Christine come in. What do we need to do to kind of give a premium? And if we encourage demand, I'm guessing that companies like yours will enter into those markets if there's demand there, right? How do we encourage the demand side to get going? Guillaume?
Yeah, currently what we can see on the market is the fact that low carbon products we have no premium for that. We can't make any money being low carbon. But that's starting to be a condition. So that's not too bad. But of course, that's not for us a way to, as Marie-Christine said, to earn money. So there is with taxonomy, with some other initiative, a way to distinguish the low carbon products compared to the other one. And we need to be transparent in the labeling because there are a lot of labels which are popping up everywhere for green material, and we need to all try to have a transparent labeling for our final customers. That's something which is important.
That's really interesting, Marie-Christine. I know a lot of work over the years on product environmental footprints. I see in the Commission's work programme potential work on green claims coming as part of the I think the circularity action plan. Sorry, Mark, there's so many action plans. I forget which one mentions which. But that's great. We're back to doing lots, which is better than the last Commission potentially. The Marie-Christine, your take on that kind of labelling information. If we can kind of get that into play, does it move markets? Is it going to create the markets that you need in Europe?
Certainly it would, but I mean also in the context with the carbon border tax adjustment, we tend to say that it will be very difficult to reliably establish such labeling system. But however, if it would be possible to do so, certainly that would be good. Regarding it was frozen at 1.2, but you were asking about low carbon products and
how do we stimulate demand? How do we get demand? This is beyond my me to say how it would. We just can state that at the moment it won't work. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. The markets are not ready for that. And regarding the taxonomy, we also see great chances in the taxonomy, and we contribute to those discussions. But please keep in mind that for copper, it's not finished yet. We are still in those discussions on that. And just because we were talking about carbon border tax just beforehand, once more, I wanted to also underline once again that because you pointed out to that. As I said before, we really see that the intention was good and that the basic thought behind it is a really good one. But the threats and the negative impacts it could have, like backlashes and not reliable detecting how things, especially in those products, how carbon free they are. It will pose too much damage or too much threat to pose a damage than it would do. What we do need is a stable single market and we should and our competitiveness, as I said before.
I mean, I think I'll bring Michael in. I mean, one observation I would have, the first of these conversations we had, Javier from down there in Huelva in Spain talking, and one of the comments he made was very much, we are talking about a European industry, but the linkages globally. You operate in global markets quite often. I mean, both in terms of the raw materials coming in, we'd had a conversation about critical raw material supply, but also in terms of the demand side. I just wanted to read Rana from, I think from Hydro up there in Norway made a comment on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, says if global level playing field is decisive for a greener European industry to recover and grow, carbon border adjustment mechanisms about carbon content problem for our industry is that carbon costs cannot be passed on into the final product price. So the logic of that as a protection mechanism doesn't quite work for non-ferrous, according to Ronald up there in Norway, one of the large European vertically integrated companies there coming in. Michael, when we talked about stimulated demand and what we could do, you put your hand up, so it sounded like you might have the solution. Sounds like an amendment is ready to be made when the Commission proposes some legislation. Michael, how do we stimulate demand? I think you wanted to come in on, right?
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about labeling. I think it's also important to talk about public procurement and opening like public procurement rules to allow for the request to low carbon products. I think it's important to also think about eco design and quotas in products. However, I think in all of these issues, we still come to the question of how to establish the carbon content of a product, which is the same question that we have when we talk about the carbon border adjustment. So we have to solve this. We have to solve this issue for a lot of different instruments. But yeah, that kind of, I think, is like in this way we can establish markets. Also, the Industrial Emission Directive maybe is interesting to look at, but the public procurement and the eco design I think is important. But yeah, and I think when now the Commission comes up with the new reforms of the eco design and also like for public procurement, we really need to see something more tangible, because it is in the strategy of the Commission. It says we want to create these markets. But really, the question is then, what is the instruments? And we need to the instruments very fast.
That's good. So Mark, that sounds like all the pressure's on the Commission, because I know that most of the things that Michael just referred are all referred to in various documents that they'll be reviewed or revised in this Commission in coming years. How do you see it? Do you see kind of light at the end of the tunnel in terms of how the Commission might approach some of those dossiers and do the kind of things that Mikhail was just talking about?
Well, of course, I fully agree with Michael on the instruments. And in an ideal world, maybe in March with the industrial strategy, we would not have only said we want to create lead markets, but we would have pointed out the instruments. But also, I think from Michael's intervention, it's clear it's not that simple. Because first, you also need to establish kind of how do you define the low carbon product? But the instruments, and we need to look at the whole toolbox, and we are doing that from public procurement to eco design to labeling. Because it also depends on where is the demand. I think there is on the consumer side quite some awareness, and consumer products that are close to a consumer might actually be able to pay a premium for low carbon products. But on a B2B side, it's a completely different mechanism. So that's why we also really need to look at how can we incentivize the demand depending on where the demand comes from. But this work clearly, and its priority implementation, both of the circular economy and the industrial strategy, and concrete actions will come forward sooner rather than later.
We like concrete actions. It seems that there's a lot that the Commission is going to need to deliver on in the next couple of years to keep both industry happy, but also the Parliament, I think.
One more idea would be to increase demand through a consequent green public procurement. How do you see that?
Green public procurement. I know we have Green Public Procurement Directive. It's coming up for review, I remember, for one of the work programme or one of the action plans. Mark, is there a focus on green public procurement? Are we going to focus on specific sectors or specific products, or what can we expect in that review? Do you have any insight?
Well, green public procurement or sustainable public procurement is clearly one clear driver that we can use. Again, we need then to and public procurers are usually simply looking at costs, and it's complex when they need to look into many details. They also will need guidance from us. Then what is actually a green procurement? Is it's then looking at the whole product life cycle, the materials that are in the product that actually can make the procurement green. And there clearly further work and guidance will be needed for the procurers.
So I noted in other settings, people refer to some of the Nordic countries being leaders in this kind of field in the way that they're greening public procurement. Do you, Michael, do you look at any examples from member states and say there's some best practice to follow there in greening public procurement? Or are we've been talking about this, haven't we, since like integrated product policy back when I was a lad? We've talked about this a long time, greening public procurement. Is there any bright lights out there we should be copying that anyone's seen? No, that looks like a no. Okay, I'm going to move along then. Guillaume, we haven't had you in the conversation in a while. Apologies, so I know your video keeps cutting in and out. Just wanted to bring you in on anything that you've heard before I go to the final round of questions.
Thanks. I don't have many more questions, but what is very important for me is that we have a unique instant with this recovery from the crisis to take the good decision. And if we do that in a positive manner, we can both achieve the very important target we have in terms of carbon neutrality, while being able to recover economically as well.
So I'm going to take it to just a final sentence from each of you before I do the commercial advertisement for the next webinar. Can I just get from each of you? I mean, I don't think there's anyone in this discussion who doesn't believe that we need to get to climate neutrality by 2050, or indeed that they don't have a role to play. We heard of Guillaume, we've heard of Marie-Christine, the kind of things that their organisations are doing. Clearly, both of you have that as your objective on the institutional side. I also think there's a recognition probably we need each other. So institutions need industry to do things and vice versa. Could I ask each of you, just in turn, if there was one thing you could ask to the other party? So if you're an institutional actor, what's the one thing you think industry could do tomorrow that would be helpful in terms of getting this goal done? And equally from the industry speakers, what's the one thing that our institutional speakers could do? Mikhail, I gave you the last of the first round, so I'll put you first this time round. What would you like our industry guys to do? What's the one thing they could do for you?
So I mean, I grew up in the climate movement, and we were protesting against coal, and I'm still doing this. And but I think that the framework in which we are discussing changed a little bit. Now I see like your industry and Fridays for Future on the right side, and others on the other side. And I think the same happens in the Commission right now. There is like the ones who really want to go forward. There's the ones who kind of are more the advocacies of the past. And it's important that you, as the industry that wanted, that you are really voicing this, say it loud and clear, because also currently, when I look into the debates we have in the committee on the industrial strategy, there's in the beginning, there was a lot of enthusiasm about this green transition, and now this enthusiasm goes a little bit down. So we need you to really repeat it, and that the Commission and we all move towards really channeling the money into the right direction that we're now spending.
That's great. So I can assure you, Emiko, you've been on one of our webinars. This is our third one. There's a positivity, and we've had some senior execs championing those kind of things. So I hear what you're saying. Keep championing, being vocal. Mark, one thing from you that you'd like to see from the industry that might be helpful?
Well, actually, I think Guillaume has put it already in one sentence. It's make use of the recovery for the transformation of the industry, for the green transformation. Because there is the risk that you could turn it the other way around and say we're in a crisis, we don't do anything, and postpone what will be needed anyway. So use the recovery for transformation.
So we're putting a lot of money on the table now. There's an expectation that industry goes and uses it for the right things to get us going. I like that. Yes. Okay, Marie-Christine.
Yeah.
What would you ask of the policymakers on the line?
I would have 3 wishes, in fact, not only one.
Okay.
One is integrate metals in the industry strategy as well in those thoughts of strategic autonomy, the whole sector. It's absolutely crucial. Please keep in mind our copper in Europe, total Europe, emits the European copper production emits half of the CO2 emissions of those competitors worldwide. So integrate us. Please, in those discussions around eligibility, energy prices, keep us in mind. We only can do good things, and we only can continue to do good things if we have the money to do so. And the third is very simple, and this is the perfect example here. Let's keep talking, and let's design regulation and politics and discussions together, and not over the head of the other one. Because I think what became perfectly clear here is that we in fact do have the same goals, and we do have the same aims. Sometimes it's a question of how to get there, but this is discussable, but the aim is the same one. So let's keep talking and let's keep in touch. And
I'm also noticing in this series, Mikhail, that actually we have a preponderance of green MEPs joining us in these discussions, which is great. It really is.
Yeah.
Fine. Guillaume, you line out. What's the one thing you'd like to see the policymakers do for us?
Yeah, clearly, Marie-Christine has presented that very well, and I will not add anything to what she asked for. Maybe just two other things. You mentioned that for copper, it's the copper produced in EU is half CO2 less compared to the rest of the world. That's exactly the same for aluminum. Even it could be maybe a third, mainly because we are EV and very intensive electric users. So what is very, very important is to keep us alive so we can be greener and greener.
Perfect. Thank you, Guillaume. So at that point, I'll say thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time in the middle of the day to join us and have a discussion. Thank you to everyone around Europe who's been listening in. Hopefully that's been an interesting discussion for you. Thank you for bearing with us with technology issues. No animals or children, but certainly technology. Just to flag to you, the registration will be open in a moment for the fourth of our series, which is with Bjorn Hansen of ECHA, Maria Spiraki of the European Parliament. We're talking about sustainable chemicals management in the context of Green Deal. Lots of linkages there to all of the objectives we've been talking about. At that, I will wish you all well throughout Europe, and please do stay safe as we start to open up. Let's not ruin it at the end of this, okay? Stay safe, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.